Israel is calling the death toll after Saturday's terrorist attack staggering. It is now known that Hamas militants killed at least 1,200 people and that most were civilians. The new number has come to light as the military discovers more bodies. Israel has intensified its airstrikes on Gaza in retaliation. Palestinian officials say at least 900 people there have been killed and thousands more wounded. Israel is also massing troops on the border and is widely expected to start a ground offensive into Gaza soon. DW's Rebecca Ritters reports from the Israeli town of Sderot, close to the Gaza Strip.
This is the Sderot police station, or what's left of it, and it's the scene of one of the biggest battles during this ordeal. Hamas militants were holed up inside and the Israeli military were caught up in a 20-hour gun battle.
Local residents left terrified and angry.
Horrifying because we saw them running around here everywhere. We were pretty much innocent and we didn't have anything to do in this entire situation. No weapons to, protect ourselves. Nothing to actually do in this situation.
I've been through wars, but nothing like this, nothing like animals and who slaughters and butchers our kids and sisters and our fathers and our children and our babies and everything. Such a cruelty.
Israel is responding to the attacks with massive airstrikes on the Gaza Strip. The Israeli government has told Gazans to evacuate, but the territory is trapped between Israel, Egypt and the Mediterranean Sea. Most residents have nowhere to go to escape the bombs. One woman said her brother died while trying to follow Israel's instructions to relocate.
We'd fled to escape death. There were continuous airstrikes. The Israelis told us to come down to Khan Yunis, but we only found death there. If we stay home, we die. If we go in the streets, we die. My beloved brother fled from one place to another. My beloved brother, may your soul rest in peace.
The skies over Gaza are filled with rockets and missiles flying in both directions, incoming and outgoing fire. In the Israeli town of Ashkelon, north of the Gaza Strip, Hamas rockets continue to cause destruction. Israel has called up hundreds of thousands of reservists as it prepares the next stage of its retaliation. At least one government minister has joined the troops to avenge what he calls Israel's 9/11.
This is not going to be another circle. We're going to chase and hunt each and every militant of Hamas. We're going to chase and hunt their leaders. And we will fight until the end against them, and we will be victorious, not just for us, but for the sake of the civilized world.
A ground offensive by Israeli forces looks likely. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu told his country to prepare for a long and difficult war that he says will reshape the Middle East.
And joining us from Tel Aviv is Lieutenant Colonel Jonathan Conricus from the Israeli Army. Lieutenant Colonel, thank you so much for your time. Israel is massing forces on Gaza's border. There is, of course, speculation that a ground offensive into Gaza is imminent. Is that something being considered or planned as things stand now?
Yes, good night. Thank you for having me on your show. Israel is fighting for and defending itself on three fronts. The southern front in Gaza, which you have spoken about, is still active, and there are still attacks by terrorists trying to get into Israeli communities. They are met by Israeli soldiers who are ready to engage and have ended all of these engagements with killed terrorists in the latest hours, both in Ashkelon and in another community in the south. Rockets have been fired at Israel from Syria. We do not yet know if it was Iranian proxies, Hezbollah, or the Syrian armed forces, but we retaliated fire towards those who fired, and currently the situation there is stable. In the north, along our northern border, Hezbollah and other Iranian proxy terror organization, has fired anti-tank missiles, and other terrorists have tried to infiltrate across the border. All of those events have since been taken care of, and currently there is no fighting there, but we are deployed in significant strength and numbers, vigilant and ready to respond to any aggression from those areas.
So thank
in
you
the
so
south,
much for,
we have
for spelling all that out. My question is a ground offensive into Gaza something that is being planned or considered?
Yes, I was just about to get to that. So in the south, we have deployed, or we have called up 300,000 reservists from infantry, armor, artillery, combat engineers, and combat intelligence units. They are now around the Gaza Strip, getting ready to execute their missions, preparing, getting their gear and everything in order. The assignment that the IDF has been given by the Israeli government is to take away all of Hamas military activities, so that at the end of this war, Hamas does not have any military capacity to kill, terrorize, or hurt Israeli civilians.
Can I take your answer to mean that you are not ruling out a ground offensive into Gaza?
You'd be correct in assessing that. All options are on the table. And as I said, our troops are preparing in order to implement the mission, to execute the mission that we have been given by the Israeli government. We are at war against a bloodthirsty terror organization that is as brutal, ruthless, and inhumane as ISIS was in its worst days. And I think that there is unfortunately ample evidence of that when you see the images coming out of the kibbutzim, the communities along the Gaza Strip, of 40, 50, and hundreds of Israeli bodies that are scattered across those communities, including women, children, and the elderly. The only conclusion that you can make once you see that footage is that we are dealing with monsters that have no regard for human life and crossed the border only in order to kill and take hostage Israeli civilians.
So you've just mentioned these hostages, and I do want to ask you about that. How does this very, very complicated mission complicate these efforts in terms of getting to the hostages held by Hamas militants? Because on the one hand, there are strikes from the Israeli military onto Gaza, but on the other hand, you want to rescue the hostages that are being held in Gaza. Could you spell this out a bit more clearly for us, the complicated the mission that's ahead of you?
Yeah, I think you touched upon the complexity quite well. The situation is that there are dozens of Israelis in Gaza. Most of them are civilians. I'm talking about women, children, disabled people, elderly people, and even babies or toddlers. There's even a Holocaust survivor that we assess is being held by Hamas. We know of hostages that are also with dual nationality. There are Americans, Germans, French, Brits, Brazilians, and Ukrainians, and from additional countries that are being held by Hamas. So this situation, this extremely complex situation, is not an Israeli problem, only an Israeli problem, but we are talking about many countries that have their nationals at the mercy or lack of mercy of Hamas. You are right that the complexity here is immense, but our focus is the strategic focus of denying Hamas the ability to have any military capacity against Israel. And that is what our aerial campaign is focused on, and that is what the next stages of our military operation will be focused on. But it is an unprecedented issue. We have never before been tasked with dealing with such a complex, sensitive, and frankly, heart-wrenching dilemma that we have before us today. But we will address it, and at the end of this war, we will prevail.
So just finally, could you spell out for us, please, what are the measures that the Israeli military is taking to minimise both civilian casualties in terms of hostages, but also Palestinians in Gaza as Israel responds to this attack?
Yes, the Gaza Strip is a small and dense place. More than 2 million people live there. Most of them are not Hamas supporters. They live there under oppression of Hamas. And Hamas, being coward terrorists, are hiding behind the civilians and using them as human shields. And Hamas has purposely positioned all of their infrastructure, all of their military hardware, their positions, the rockets, the bunkers, and every places that Hamas is. They have positioned that behind the civilians, and they are using them as human shields. We are trying the best we can to strike only military targets, and we act upon precise intelligence, and we try to deliver very precise ordnance only at places where we know that Hamas uses them for military purposes. It's important for me to explain that while you're showing footage of what looks like civilian houses being struck from the air and collapsing for the untrained eye, the problem with Hamas is that they don't put signs on buildings where they have offices and research and development and command and control. There's no sign that says this is a Hamas facility. They hide amongst the civilians. And therefore, it's very important to understand that we are striking houses and facilities that look civilian, but they're not, because they are used by terrorists in order to fight against us, and that's why they are legitimate military targets. But I want to say and emphasize, and shortly, we are committed to the law of armed conflict. We do not want to strike civilians, and we will try not to affect civilians as we carry on with this war against Hamas in Gaza.
Lieutenant Colonel Jonathan Conricus from the Israeli Defense Forces, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. Good night.
And I'm now joined by the DW Middle East analyst, Shani Rosanis. Good to have you in the studio, Shani. We know that the death toll's risen. What more do we know about the situation on the ground today? Are there still Hamas militants in Israel?
Yes, there are. And the problem is the Israelis don't know how many and where exactly. The assumption is that there are several groups of them hiding somewhere along Israel once the border was crossed and they made it to Israel. And that keeps everybody on edge. That's what we're seeing in Israel, a lot of agitation, a lot of alertness. Also in the northern border, where we see little incursions coming from the Shiite group Hezbollah in the north. So everything is very, very tense. Right. And if you look at Gaza, then of course there's a lot of suffering. There's bombardments, constant bombardments from the air by Israeli Air Force. So this is where we stand today.
Shani, it's all but certain that Israel is preparing a ground offensive. Is there any indication as to when this offensive will be launched and what it might look like?
Well, we hear a lot of talks about this is going to be unprecedented. This is going to be something that the Palestinians, the region, have never seen before. Israel is very much aware of the fact that Hamas is anticipating this a ground operation. And it's trying to reinvent the playbook in Gaza. We know what we used to see in Gaza. It's quite hard to predict what we're going to see. There's one thing clear that we're seeing from all decision makers in Israel. They will stop at nothing. They have the shock is such that they sound very militant, with very little care for humanitarian or any other considerations.
And to that point, it's pretty clear that the stated goal here is to eradicate Hamas. Shani, in the event that were to happen, and it really looks likely that there's going to be this vacuum in Gaza.
Correct.
What does Israel intend to do then? Will we see Israel take full control of the territory?
That's part of what we're still not sure of. We don't know. There are no clear aims to this war, to this operation. We don't know if Israel is only trying to dismantle Hamas's military capabilities or take over Hamas's control over the territory in total, and that would mean recapturing Gaza and reoccupying it, which I think very few people in Israel are interested in. What's obviously not spoken out loud, at least, are any political, diplomatical solutions that will bring in other allies from the region. And that, I think, will have to inevitably be on the table, but it's still not there yet.
The US President Joe Biden, he's spoken out on the issue. We also know that he is in constant engagement with the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. What do you know about those discussions, and what did you make of what he had to say when he addressed
right from the start, it was important for Biden to clearly indicate that he's standing behind Israel, and he has also sent a lot of military support to the Middle East. The biggest fear looming is Iran and Iran's involvement. You know, we know that Iran is in the back channels, the one behind, to some extent, what we're seeing in Gaza, definitely what we might be seeing in the north with Hezbollah. And that's the biggest fear that Netanyahu and Biden are sharing, and they want to keep Iran at bay. We also know that from reports that Biden has seen the photos of the victims, of the wreckage, of the horror left behind of the victims who were really left in unbelievably terrible state, and he was very touched by it. And this is also partially fueling his personal anger as someone who's seen himself as a friend of Israel for many years.
Shani, we'll leave it there for now.
Thank you, Christine.
DW Middle East analyst Shani Razan is there. And we want to get some more analysis on this. And for that, I want to bring in military analyst Frank Ledwidge. He is in Oxford in the United Kingdom. Good to see you, Frank. I want to talk about the ground offensive that we're anticipating in a short moment. But let's begin with this. We understand that it is likely that there are still some Hamas militants in Israel. What do you make of that?
Well, as Shani said, there are almost certainly considerable numbers, I would suggest. The Israelis have killed, they say, about 1,500 Hamas terrorists, and they don't know the numbers of the incursion itself. I've no doubt at all that there are dozens at least. And of course, there may well be sleeper cells as well, which would be part of the overall Hamas plan. So there's no wonder, as Shani says, the Israelis are on pins about this.
Yeah. Frank, we see Israel stepping up its airstrikes, bombing buildings in Gaza. Would these strikes be part of the preparation for this ground offensive, this anticipated ground offensive?
Yes, Christine. What's happening now is preparation of the battlefield, as the military term goes, and the Israelis are warning sector by sector in Gaza to leave, and they're carrying through their strikes systematically. So this is all part of probably it's certainly part of a target list, or they're going through a target list prepared over a period of years, because they've been planning for something like this. They never wanted to execute it, but they've been planning for it. They know the ground, and now that plan is being executed.
And what will that execution actually look like? What will we see when the Israeli army launches that ground offensive?
It's difficult to say tactically. There are only a limited number of ingress and ingress routes in, which will be heavily defended by Hamas. They know which way the Israelis are going to come in when they come in force. We're likely to see some surprises. What form they take, I don't know. The form it will take will be an infantry assault. Tanks are useful in certain areas of Gaza, but overall, the Israeli armoured corps, I suspect, will be staying back because Hamas has very effective anti-tank capabilities in the shape of Russian-supplied, or rather Russian-made missiles. So this is going to be an infantry battle, and it's going to be horrific. It's a three-dimensional battle anyway. It's a heavily urbanized area. The Israelis are going to be worried about forces from underneath, from the tunnels, from behind, from in front, of course, and from above. Uniquely, Christine, from the Israeli perspective, or rather for the first time, Israeli soldiers are going to have to be looking up, because Hamas has quite a well-developed now drone force, which it's been putting together over the last decade or so. And that will remove the Israeli unique advantage of surveillance.
Interesting point you make there. I want to look at the capabilities on the Hamas side. Given the resources that they deployed in Saturday's attacks, does Hamas have the numbers to resist an Israeli military ground incursion? I'm talking boots on the ground here.
Well, Christine, the force they deployed on over the weekend and recently amounts to between probably 1,500 and 2,500. Most assessments of Hamas's manpower put it between 15 and 20,000. That's just Hamas. So yes, they have the numbers. Whether they'll be able to resist the Israelis is another thing. But the important thing to remember here is both sides have been planning this for years and years. And Hamas may have the edge on this, because for now anyway, because they have proved themselves over the last few months to be highly dynamic. So they're going to be waiting for the Israelis. And that's something, of course, needless to say, the Israelis are going to be fully aware of. We've got an irresistible force meeting an immovable object. One side will have to give. I suspect it'll be Hamas. But to answer your point, yes, they've got the boots, the numbers to cause the Israelis serious damage.
OK, Frank, we'll leave it there. Thank you. Military analyst Frank Ledwidge. Thank you.
Thank you.